What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Thursday, May 2nd, 2019. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, observations, opinions, whatever. So let's just get right on into it. Obviously, the situation in Venezuela is not going very well for the U.S. war hawks. In fact, Maduro apparently made an appearance today surrounded by the Venezuelan military, and it was a huge crowd. And that's in stark contrast to the video that Guaido put out the other day, where he had just a handful of military standing around him outside this military base near Caracas. It's clear that Guaido has completely failed to get popular support or military support for his coup d'etat. The renta mobs are small, and they're not enthusiastic about what's going on there. So everybody's already saying this thing has pretty much fallen flat on its face. And over at The Atlantic, they're saying how an elaborate plan to topple Venezuela's president went wrong. So even over at The Atlantic, they're saying this is a bust. You know, this is a bust. And basically saying that if you look at the chess game of Venezuela, the board has been tipped over, the pieces are all over the floor. And yeah, that's pretty much what it looks like. Over at Consortium News, they have another article. The failed coup argues for a new approach. And it's basically saying that louder condemnations of Maduro and more macho threats are not going to work. You know, some houses, no matter how much you huff and puff, are not so easily blown down. We certainly learned that with Assad in Syria, and we're learning it again with Maduro in Venezuela. Now, Donald Trump is out there saying that the brutal repression of the Venezuelan people must end, and it must end soon. Now, here is the interesting part of this article here. The Washington Post earlier today reported that U.S. President Donald Trump is unlikely to launch any long-term military intervention in Venezuela, while U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton was allegedly urging him to do so. So this is going to be a litmus test, because if the U.S. does militarily intervene in Venezuela, it tells us Trump is not in charge. Bolton is. So, meanwhile, Pompeo is now backpedaling on the U.S. claims that Venezuelan officials were ready to abandon Maduro. There was a whole flood of stories that came out earlier today about how this top security official was ready to abandon Maduro, was ready to turn on him. These other officials were ready to do that. Apparently, more of the attempts to demoralize Maduro's support. And Pompeo is now saying that, well, the Venezuelan officials have not been as clear about abandoning Maduro as Trump officials had alleged just 24 hours ago. So yet another piece of propaganda is twitching in the dust, as it were. Trump, meanwhile, is issuing a warning to Russia that they must get out of Venezuela, that his administration has warned the Russian government to stay out of Venezuela, and again, basically just saying Russia has to get out. So I don't think Russia is going to take that too seriously. I mean, heck, we can't stop all these illegal immigrants crossing our borders. Doesn't make it look like our military is all that effective. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov basically came on out after speaking to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, saying that the Russian and the U.S. positions on the Venezuelan crisis are totally incompatible. And Lavrov urged the United States to refrain from returning to the imperious Monroe Doctrine in its relations with Venezuela, and indicated that while the Russian and U.S. positions on the crisis are incompatible, dialogue should continue. He said, we agree to maintain contacts, including on Venezuela, but I don't see a way to reconcile our positions. Ours on the one hand, which is based on the UN Charter and the principles and norms of international law, and that of the United States on the other, in which Washington assigns the acting president of another country, which is exactly what happened. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar basically came on out saying that the reason conditions in Venezuela are so bad is because of American policies that have been put in place that have led to the devastation in Venezuela. And she was on Democracy Now! She said, we've sort of set the stage for where we're arriving today. On that issue, she's correct. I don't agree with everything Omar says, but she's correct on that. We have been seeing economic war waged against Venezuela going all the way back to Hugo Chavez, who refused to play ball with American corporations, basically wanted to spend Venezuela's wealth on the Venezuelan people. Oh, gosh darn, that's socialist. How could he do that? Sets a bad example for the rest of the world. But former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley has come on out slamming Omar, saying that, no, we're not bullying the Venezuelan dictator. She had all the buzzwords in there. The brutal Venezuelan dictator, for example. And saying the sanctions are there to intervene and help the people of Venezuela. And again, go back and look at every single U.S. intervention that has gone on since the end of World War II. Not one of them has ever actually produced a truly functioning democracy. And in every single case, the standard of living for the ordinary people has declined as the wealth and resources of that targeted nation are plundered by American corporations. That's really what's going on here. Joe Biden may have done himself a great deal of damage for his impending career. He is siding with Trump, Bolton, and Pompeo in saying, yes, we've got to regime change Venezuela. We've got to get the evil tyrant Maduro out. We've got to get Guaido in. And I haven't seen any polls recently about this. I probably ought to put one up. I do have a polling system at whatreallyhappened.com. I don't think the American people are in the mood for another prolonged war. I really don't think that they are. And again, another story here. This one's from Sputnik News. Bolton is pushing the military option for Venezuela as Trump and the Pentagon hesitate. Now, the Pentagon, they love more wars. It means more money. But if they're hesitating, it's because they know they could get into trouble on this one. But apparently there was a clash between Bolton's staff and Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Paul J. Selva, with members of the Bolton camp repeatedly interrupting him during a briefing in which the general advised against escalating the situation in the Latin American country. So, John, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture facilities. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we're going to call Maduro and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But I think for the majority of the American people, we want to sit this one out. We've wanted to sit all these wars out. These wars are not bringing any benefit to the United States of America or the American people, only to corporate interests and the bankers and the defense contractors. Now, Bolton is continuing to push this idea that there are 25,000 Cuban troops in Venezuela and that Cuba is behind the failed U.S.-backed coup. And saying that if the 25,000 Cuban troops left the country, Venezuela would fall by midnight. Now, Cuba, of course, has denied having any kind of military personnel in Venezuela or engaging in any military operations there. Bolton, of course, had no evidence to support his claims. It's just more war-generating lies. Okay. Now, another point of view is coming out from David Icke's website, saying that a U.S. terror attack on Venezuela is now imminent. Now that the coup d'etat attempt has failed, war is coming, in David's opinion. And if Bolton has his way, David is right. Now, an interesting little phenomenon is taking place over in Europe. When Mike Pence called Guaido, and Guaido stood up and said, I am the interim president of Venezuela, and the U.S. said, yes, we back him, we recognize him immediately. Most of the European leaders just basically hopped on board the U.S. agenda and said, yes, we agree. But all of a sudden, they're starting to pull back and saying, this may not really be working all that well. The military did not defect in great numbers. The coup attempt has fizzled out. And all of a sudden, these European leaders are thinking they might just be on the wrong side of history. Now, yesterday, we ran a story on how Representative Mario Diaz-Balart of Florida was on Tucker Carlson, and it sparked this headline that Russia has nukes in Venezuela. It turns out, in hindsight, according to this article in Russia Today, he didn't actually say that. It was kind of sort of, shall we say, enthusiastic editing on the part of Fox News to get that message out there. And it was kind of a ridiculous claim to begin with. So, not too long ago, actually about a week ago, the former head of the CIA and now Secretary of State admitted that the CIA lies, cheats, steals. And having admitted that, Pompeo is now out there with more propaganda. This, of course, has to do with the fact that Pompeo claimed that Maduro had been ready to flee to Havana, Cuba, amid the early morning chaos of Tuesday's failed coup, but had been convinced to stay by the Russian government. Pompeo made the claim during a Tuesday interview with CNN, stating that Maduro had an airplane on the tarmac. He was ready to leave this morning, as we understand it, and the Russians indicated he should stay. So the coup has failed, and now they're pointing the fingers. Oh, it was all Russia's fault. It was all Cuba's fault. Oh, those dastardly people, how dare they come into our hemisphere and just muck about with our imperial ambitions. And again, I'm in agreement with those who say the Monroe Doctrine really should not apply here, because the United States is also in the other hemisphere, mucking about with other people's countries. So it is a bit of a mess here. Over in Syria, militants are claiming that 4 Russians were killed in Hama, and there's been another attack on the Haiman air base. And the reports came amid a new round of escalation in the area, caused by renewed militant attacks on positions of the Syrian Arab Army. According to pro-militant sources, Syrian and Russian aircraft carried out at least 50 strikes on militant targets in northern Hama and southern Idlib. So that's still rocking and rolling over there. Apparently, government reinforcements have arrived in the area to strengthen the Syrian Arab Army positions near the so-called demilitarized zone, which very clearly is not demilitarized at all. Pro-government sources started a new round of speculation. This is a sign of an upcoming military operation near Idlib. So that is still going there. Interestingly enough, up in Afghanistan, something very weird just happened. Now, the Pentagon has long insisted that data on who is in control of Afghan territory was the metric that's most telling in a counterinsurgery. All of a sudden, the Pentagon has announced that they will no longer be keeping track of that at all and will not be providing that data to the U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. Now, Sigar John Sipko was critical of the move, saying the Pentagon was providing even less information for the American taxpayers to gauge whether their investment in Afghanistan is a success. Well, no, it wasn't. The American taxpayers' investment benefits the oil industry and the drug lords. But all of a sudden, if they're not going to release any more data on just how much of Afghanistan is back under the control of the Taliban, that signals the United States is losing. Now, right after 9/11 and the U.S. went into Afghanistan and installed their own government in Kabul, the Taliban held just a tiny, tiny fraction of the country. And right now, they appear to be basically in control of the majority of it. And this story out of Zero Hedge, I think, really tells us what's going on. The Taliban appears to be winning against the U.S.-backed puppet government in Kabul. This is coming from a Pentagon watchdog. And apparently it's getting very serious over there. They're calling it the Forever War. It's the longest war we've ever been in, except for Korea. But the situation in Afghanistan is worse than commonly perceived. The war to roll back the Taliban is not merely stalled. There are indicators that Taliban is actually winning. The report found that Afghan national forces backed by the U.S. have seen a 31% surge in casualties in recent months. So we're losing over there. We've pretty much lost in Syria. We are losing in Afghanistan. Story coming out of Middle East Monitor, how Trump's hawkish advisors won the debate on the Iran oil sanctions. You know what's really troubling right now to me? We've got all these hawks out there urging all these wars, and they're not looking at the wars they've already started. Their attitude seems to be, okay, I got a war going in Syria and I got a war going in Afghanistan. On to the next one. That's somebody else's mess to clean up. So they're talking about the Iran oil sanctions. And apparently the hawks were behind this push to ban all Iranian oil purchases on the 1st of May, yesterday, ending the exemptions for 8 nations. So apparently, sources are saying this was all from the influence of the hardliners within the National Security Councils, which 2 of the sources said were the biggest advocates for the decision. And they have been arguing for tightening the sanctions over the objections of State Department officials who favored allowing some partners and allies to keep buying Iranian oil. So a senior administration official is saying no one's actually trying to take this all the way to zero, but trying to forge a consensus among the various government agencies required a lot of work. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go to the phones here and take a phone call from Jim in Illinois. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, I read in the foreign press today, it stated America new migrant crisis, and what it basically stated, each day people are leaving Venezuela, they're going to Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Spain. Unfortunately or fortunately, those leaders in those countries do not want them. So they're calling the UN, the leaders of those countries are calling the UN, stating America should take these people because they're causing a problem in Venezuela.
Well, there is certainly merit in that argument, but again, we have so many people coming to this country right now, and they're bringing in criminals, people with contagious diseases. It's a real mess. This U.S. imperial doctrine, if you will, going back to the Project for the New American Century, has really messed up the planet.
Right, I would agree with that. Yeah, and the other thing. Are you aware of the situation in Haiti right now?
I know that there's a lot of rioting going on there. They're kind of fed up with their government.
Yeah, they're not only that. Since they can no longer get oil from Venezuela, everything has doubled. The food, the petrol, everything has doubled because nothing is able to come in there as far as getting things for energy. Gas, electricity, and things like that.
Well, that's going to be a factor all around the entire Caribbean, including Cuba and all of those islands, because they were used to buying their oil from Venezuela.
Right, and I was surprised to hear last week that there's like 1,500 Cubans waiting in Mexico to come to America, or hoping to come to America.
I'm not surprised. Everybody, unfortunately, America's propaganda machine, the corporate media, movies, TV, whatever, have put out an image of the United States that looks very attractive. Unfortunately, that America doesn't exist anymore. It's been slowly deteriorating over the last 30 years. And I understand that a lot of the migrants who come to this country will come up here and look around and realize this isn't what we thought we were going to be seeing. And I can imagine they're going to cities like Los Angeles and Seattle and San Francisco based on what they've seen of those places in TV shows and films. And when they look at what they have deteriorated into, I'm not surprised that some of the migrants are actually trying to go home now.
Right. Well, Michael, that's it. You take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. And we're now getting this story here. Apparently, this is being reported in Al Masdar News, that apparently Israeli tanks have crossed the demilitarized zone and in the Golan Heights and entered Syrian territory. And in response, the Syrian Arab Army has raised their alert levels, and they're moving their forces toward the demilitarized zone. So it looks like we're going to have yet another battle over there as well. Okay, article that came out of Information Clearinghouse, how the Pentagon took ownership of Donald Trump. And it's basically talking about why Trump continues to back the Pentagon. Because they don't really seem to win the wars. They don't lose them, but they don't win them. And of course, the reason for that is simple. Winning a war is a disaster for the Pentagon, because then the money stops. The Pentagon loves wars that drag on forever, because it keeps the money flowing out of your pockets and into the pockets of the defense contractors, the defense establishment, the military-industrial complex. I remember a lot of people were talking about Vietnam the same way. We're not winning. Why are we still doing this? Remember the Pentagon Papers? In large part, it was nobody wanted to be the president who lost that war. But the other part of it was it didn't matter if we were winning or losing. As long as the war kept going, the defense establishment was making money. Now, the Pentagon is claiming that 120 civilians were killed worldwide by the U.S. forces in 2018. Various other agencies like Amnesty International and Air Wars are saying the number is much, much higher. Something like 1,600 civilians just in 2017 during the U.S. offensive on Raqqa. Now, the Pentagon isn't denying the numbers. They're just saying, well, there's a discrepancy because we use a different methodology and different sources to determine whether civilian casualties have occurred and whether such casualties really did occur as a result of U.S. military actions. In other words, they're cooking the books, they're fudging the numbers, as they always do. The American people didn't learn how many of our kids we lost in Vietnam until after that war was over. We got to take another break for commercials. We got another caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go right back to the phones to Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm really disappointed I'm not going to be able to see the highly intelligent Sheila Jackson Lee interrogate William Barr. That would have been fun to watch. I mean, they put that poison pill on there on purpose, and that's because Nadler and the Democrats have finally figured out what a bunch of mental midgets they have on their judicial committee, at least in the House. I mean, the Senate, you have Crazy Maisie and a few others, but the real buffoonery is when you get to the House of Representatives and you get, like I said, Sheila Jackson Lee and that just the whole can of the clown show that is the House of Representatives. But you know, I'm really happy about the way this is all planning out because you know there's no deal and they're at war, and that's good. It's a good thing to have the deep state Democrats try to paint this guy Barr, who's like a milquetoast law and order kind of attorney general, as some kind of a crazed anti-constitutionalist, which he's obviously not. And what they're really doing is they're trying to bring Barr down and attack him because they know that Barr is not being intimidated about going after the spying and investigating the investigators.
That's exactly what's going on. You are correct.
Yeah,
that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and they know it's going to lead to Obama and Hillary and Comey and Sally Yates and Loretta Lynch. The whole can of worms is going to be open, and you know who's going to? It's already open. They already have all the info, but they didn't. They can't intimidate Barr into keeping his mouth shut, and Barr's going to go after him. And like I said, Barr is no like alt-right crazed populist. Barr is an establishment law and order Republican who's trying to save the institution, the Department of Justice, the FBI. You know, it's important. It's about time we've had a man like him come along that's not going to like turn his gaze away, and he's going to face up to the fact that either they address the corruption and what happened, or all our institutions are just, in our law, in particular our law and order and Department of Justice, will collapse. We'll become a third world country. I mean, we're either a nation of laws or we're not. So I don't really think it's as political as the Democrats try to make him out to be. I think he's more just a straight shooting law and order guy, and he sees them violating the Constitution and their oath, and he's going to go after them. And they have to do a preemptive demonization on this guy so that when he comes out and all these indictments come out, they're going to say, oh, well, that's just a politicized William Barr, But once again, it's just fun to watch the Democrats. It's like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. And, I've always said that the more hearings they have, the better for Trump and the better for the country, because when they open their mouths, they just can't seem to stop making idiots of themselves. And to watch William Barr, and whatever you want to say about the man, his intellect is incredible.
Yes.
I like watching people go to hearings. I remember that guy Whitaker, and the way I love watching some smart people go up there and just hand them their ass, And William Barr would have done that to the House. It would have been worse than anything at the Senate, because the Senate people, their senators are a little smarter than the House members. And I really kind of feel like I'm missing out on something I would have definitely watched. So,
well, see,
that
what this is about, this is not really about whether Barr is actually going to indict or prosecute anybody. It's about controlling the narrative. The Democrats are desperate to try and keep the public attention on Trump, Russia collusion. They're going to scream cover up and so forth, because when the public stops listening to Trump, Russia collusion, which is already happening, by the way, then the focus again does shift to Obama spying on the Trump campaign, and that opens up a Watergate-style scandal that the Democrats are desperate to avoid before 2020.
Well, the fact of the matter is a lot of these people have their names on documents. I mean,
Yes.
They're not going to be able. I see what they're doing. It's all theatrics and propaganda. But sooner or later, it gets down to like the signature on the FISA documents, and there's like intercepts and messaging and emails, and they're not going to be able to just holler and have all these theatrics to get their way out of this. It's going to be fun, and I'm really expecting this. Unless there's some kind of crazy false flag or some incident like that, these people are going to be facing justice, and I'm very impressed by this William Barr, and I think he's just the man to give it to him. I was reading today that he goes back to the Bush administration senior when that guy Walsh, remember that independent prosecutor Walsh was
Yes.
after Bush senior,
Yes.
and pulled the old October surprise and cost Bush the election. So, I'm sure he's pretty pissed about the politicization of the Justice Department going back 30 years almost. So maybe this is just the right man for his time. Sometimes you need that. You need a man for his time. And
well,
that could be
a lot of
William Barr.
political historians have suggested that George Herbert Walker Bush actually deliberately threw his reelection because the Lawrence Walsh investigation into Iran-Contra was getting closer and closer to him, and he basically wanted to get on out of the spotlight and distance himself from what was coming down.
Well, yeah, I've heard that theory. I've heard the theory that Clinton was actually, they wanted Clinton because of their CIA ties, and Bush had been working with Clinton in Arkansas with the cocaine and the Contras. So
that's
Billy
true.
Boy was part of the club.
That's true. They installed Clinton in there because they knew he would keep the cover-up in place. It's the same reason that Richard Nixon got rid of Spiro Agnew and got Gerald Ford into the vice presidency, because Ford had been on the Warren Commission, and he understood they had to keep the lid on one of the real motivations for the Watergate break-in. And that's why when Ford was sworn in as president, he pardoned everybody, said our nightmare is over, and basically that brought all the investigations to an end.
Yeah, let's not forget Clinton. I mean, Bush never could have gotten NAFTA through, but Clinton did. So that's one of the other benefits of having Clinton succeed Bush.
Well, there are a lot of people who would say that NAFTA really wasn't the great deal that it worked out to be. Anyway, Joe, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and phone lines are open. The other day, actually it was on Tuesday, Vice President Mike Pence basically went down to Norfolk Naval Base and delivered a message from the deck of the USS Harry S. Truman and its 7,500 sailors, basically recognizing the missions the Truman has been involved in. Also some tough talk for Venezuela. And apparently before he actually took the podium, the U.S. Navy sailors were literally given an order that when Pence was speaking, they were to clap, quote, like they were at a strip club, end quote. And this got out on Twitter, and everybody's saying, okay, here we go. So the sailors really weren't that enthusiastic. They were under orders to make a ruckus on behalf of him. China has purchased Russia's S-400 missile defense system. They bought 6 units for $3 billion. Unfortunately, some of them were actually damaged in a storm in the English Channel in December of 2017. The tempest damaged some of the missiles and auxiliary equipment, causing the ship to turn back. And so the delivery has been long delayed. Probably another reason why China wants that One Belt, One Road initiative, so they don't have to deal with things like those storms in the ocean. Russia is now sending China replacements for all those components that got damaged. Boy, talk about a warranty. So good for them here. Getting on down to Israel. Israeli settlers have destroyed more olive trees in the occupied West Bank. They attacked Palestinian farms yesterday, cut down 150 mature olive trees in the village of Burqa, east of the occupied West Bank city of Ramallah. And the settlers came from the illegal Atzaf colonial outpost built on Palestinian land and were protected by Israeli occupation forces. Now, the problem with the olive trees is exporting olives is one of the ways that West Bank Palestinians can earn a living. But it takes a long time to grow an olive tree. If you plant an olive tree today, it's going to be 10 years before it's producing saleable crop. And so this is an attack on their livelihood, and quite a devastating one. Meanwhile, another group of Jewish settlers attacked a Palestinian family and damaged the fence at their house in Tel al-Ramida in the southern West Bank city of Hebron. And apparently they were joined by soldiers of the Israeli occupation army. As you know, because of Israel's separation wall, protection wall, whatever, many Palestinian families have actually been separated. And they have been trying to basically reunify, but that takes a certain amount of paperwork. And apparently Israel has now started to block Palestinian family unification applications because of, quote, intolerable workload. So Haaretz was reporting for the last 18 months or so, a Palestinian grandfather living in East Jerusalem has been East Jerusalem and suffer from mental disabilities. The three live with the grandfather who's their guardian, but they don't have resident status in Israel because their father is dead and their mother lives in the West Bank. Okay. An Israeli human rights non-governmental organization has come on out saying there is a demonstrable rise in demolitions of Palestinian properties in occupied East Jerusalem this year. Since the start of the year, there have been 93 demolitions across East Jerusalem, 41 of which were residential units. 55 demolitions were carried out in April alone. Anyway. Okay, some 12,000 Israeli Jewish settlers raided several historic Muslim tombs belonging to scholars and prophets in the village of Kafel Haris, east of the West Bank city of Salfit. Local sources said that a large number of Israeli occupation forces also raided the city to secure the invasion of the settlers, who then performed Talmudic rituals near the Islamic tombs, which is something that the settlers regularly do to provoke the Palestinians. Article coming out of Middle East Monitor here. Israel's nation-state law merely confirms its lifelong racist nature. The drafters of the law made it crystal clear that Israel's Palestinian citizens, which is 20% of the population, are not equal citizens. They are colonial subjects. Okay. Now, Betty McCollum here in the United States has introduced a bill in Congress, the Promoting Human Rights for Palestinian Children Living Under Israeli Military Occupation Act. And Betty McCollum is an elected representative from Minnesota. She introduced a similar bill in 2017, the first in U.S. history that called for accountability and transparency regarding the aid that is going to Israel. And her concern, of course, are the growing reports that Israel's occupation forces routinely randomly arrest and then abuse Palestinian teenagers. And I'm sure that AIPAC will have their gun sights on her the next time she comes up for election. Getting on back to Donald Trump's deal of the century, story has come on out, this is over in the Jerusalem Post no less, that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has offered Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas $10 billion with a B to accept Donald Trump's deal of the century. and a senior Palestinian official in Ramallah refused to comment on the report. So they're going to bribe the guy. They're going to bribe the guy to give away the Palestinian right of return. The other day we were talking about how polls were showing that U.S. support for Israel is in decline. In fact, there was a Gallup poll that showed Americans were more supportive of the Palestinians than the Israeli cause. Israel's aware of this. They're panicking. They're trying to get all these anti-BDS laws passed, which are all unconstitutional. And every American politician who supports them, of course, is betraying the First Amendment and the Constitution. But Israel is now cranking up new pro-Israel groups. It's not just AIPAC. They're creating, dozens and dozens of new pro-Israel groups to try and lobby members of Congress to get Israel's way. But at some point, members of Congress are going to realize the American people are now awake to what's been going on in Israel and how they are being made to pay for it. Speaking of paying for it, Israel is dealing with a little bit of a problem because, as you know, last year's Eurovision was won by an Israeli in what was widely denounced as a clearly rigged online poll. And of course, that won Israel the right to host Eurovision in Tel Aviv, which they wanted to do for the public relations, image, and so forth. But apparently there's a major boycott of Eurovision, and they still have thousands of unsold tickets. And so the Israeli government is now trying to come on out and scream that anybody who doesn't show up to Eurovision, they're a filthy, Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the ovens. Story coming on out of Zero Hedge, and it's titled Humpty Dumpty Had a Great Fall. And it's basically saying that the United States government has destroyed its credibility in Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Nobody believes the U.S. government anymore. That certainly is true. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And unfortunately, the U.S. Senate has failed to override Donald Trump's veto of a resolution that would have ended Washington's military support for the Saudi Arabia-led coalition that has been bombing Yemen for 4 years. Now, it's not really being led by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is being used as a U.S. proxy, because several years ago, the U.S. executed a regime change in Yemen. The people of Yemen did not like living under puppet rule. They kicked out the puppet government. And of course, the U.S. can't tolerate that kind of a situation in one of the provinces. And realizing the American people were getting rather fed up with wars, they basically made a deal with Saudi Arabia, who has proven rather ineffective here. So back in March, the Senate passed the Yemen War Powers Resolution with a vote of 54-46. But today's vote fell short of the two-thirds majority that was needed to override Trump's veto. So the war in Yemen goes on, and you get to pay for it. Speaking of paying for it, the Air Force is heading toward its own financial cliff to the tune of roughly $4 billion. And a lot of it has to do with the rebuilding of Tyndall Air Force Base that got trashed by a hurricane. And they're saying that basically the relief efforts are going to begin lapsing due to a lack of funds, preventing the start of all new work and deferring more than 120 projects planned to begin this month. So if the Air Force does not get the additional funding, which we all know they will, it'll be forced to ground combat aircraft, defer at least 61 facility repair projects at various bases, and halt certain aircraft maintenance actions. Key weapons programs like hypersonic weapons development would be slowed down and become more costly, and non-deploying squadrons may have their flying hours stripped away. So, all right, let's turn to our domestic politics, and obviously the fire and brimstone is continuing over William Barr's testimony yesterday and his refusal to show up at the House today. But basically, the Democrats on the committee were harsh. They just came on out basically like crazy Maisie. He's saying, we know there was collusion. You know, you're lying to us. We know you're lying. Calling for his resignation. They're talking about impeachment. And they're demanding more information. They're asking for what isn't there. So once again, you know, after the way he was treated by the Democrats yesterday, I'm not surprised that he declined showing up at the House today. Okay, we got to take a break here for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about Attorney General William Barr's testimony before the Senate committee yesterday and his declining to show up to face the same treatment again today. And he was treated very badly. There's no question about that. And everybody's on his case. Hillary Clinton came on out calling Bill Barr Trump's defense lawyer, saying he's not the Attorney General in the way that he's conducted himself, and of course has joined the chorus of voices calling for him to resign or be impeached. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is also demanding William Barr resign over the Trump-Mueller report. It's just huge amount of sound and fury. Now, Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham basically got on Senator Mazie Hirono's line of questioning, saying that she slandered Barr from top to bottom, which she absolutely did. And, you know, Hirono was out there saying, you know, you're a liar. We know you're a liar. You're siding with the president over the interests of the American people. Former Attorney General Eric Holder, who was Attorney General under Obama, basically unleashed on Barr, saying his conduct is unacceptable. So apparently the coup plotters are not happy after Barr basically destroyed the Democratic senators during the hearing. First Comey and now Holder. And Barr refused to back down. He refused to be intimidated. And he doubled down on the spying allegations and confirmed he is looking into the origins of the illegal investigations of Trump and his associates. This is a bigger scandal than Watergate. And Attorney General William Barr says he will not stop using the word spying. Apparently, Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse took umbrage over the use of the word spying. But Barr alleged during his testimony to the House Appropriations Committee in April, spying did occur against the Trump campaign. And here's where it gets really interesting, because apparently the New York Times just reported that in at least one case, the FBI did send a spy to meet with George Papadopoulos. And apparently this took place in a London bar in September of 2016. And the woman was posing as a professor's assistant. And she had drinks with George, always a dangerous thing to do. And then asked him a direct question. Was the Trump campaign working with Russia? Now, the woman had set up the meeting to discuss various foreign policy issues, but she was actually a government investigator posing as a research assistant. The FBI sent her to London as part of a counterintelligence inquiry opened that summer to understand Trump's campaign links to Russia, which, as it turns out, of course, did not exist. So yeah, spying was taking place here. Now, during yesterday's hearing, Ben Rhodes, who was Obama's deputy of national security, actually squirmed when he was asked if Obama was involved in the FBI investigation of Trump. See, that's the most protected point. That's what they're trying to distract from. They want to keep the focus on Trump, Russia, and because people are starting to ask, was this another Watergate? Did the Obama administration use government agencies like the FBI to spy on a political campaign? And that's what they don't want people thinking about. And the new spin now, of course, is that, well, whatever happened back then, whether it was the FISA documents or the spying or whatever, it was all justified because the Obama administration was trying to stop Russia from meddling in the 2016 election. And again, there is no evidence that it ever actually happened. But that's the new Democratic talking point. It was done in a good cause. We did bad things, but for a good reason. House Democrats are now weighing a contempt of Congress charge for William Barr for refusing to turn over the unredacted special counsel's report on their deadline. And William Barr is saying the Democrats changed the rules on him. Basically, they had an agreement on how he was going to testify, and at the last second, they changed the rules. Now, Democrats are saying that Barr was terrified of facing the skilled interrogator they had arranged for, was giving excuses. It's supposed to be a hearing, not a grilling, not an inquisition. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Okay, it is now coming on out that the Oars were funneling uncorroborated intelligence on Donald Trump using private emails. And these are being called the Hi Honey emails. And they were from Nellie Orr to her high-ranking federal prosecutor husband and his colleagues. And of course, Nellie Orr was working for Fusion GPS, or working with them rather. And so it basically opens up the possibility that this unverified Hillary Clinton-funded opposition research was being backdoored into the Justice Department during the 2016 election through the so-called marital channel. Now, according to Jim Jordan, a criminal referral against Nellie Orr is now being finalized. So Nellie was hired by opposition research firm Fusion GPS. She conducted extensive opposition research on the Trump family members and campaign's ads, which she passed along to Bruce on a memory stick, and now we know by private email. Now remember, Hillary Clinton's campaign paid Fusion GPS to produce and launder the salacious and unverified and now discredited Steele dossier. Anyway, article coming on out of Russia Today. Hillary Clinton appeared on TV proposing that China hack into Donald Trump's tax returns and make them public, which caused a lot of people to question her ability to move on from her election defeat, which no, she can't, and to question her sanity. And her rationale for all of this was, well, Russia is clearly backing the Republicans, so it's time for China to back the Democrats. It's a little bit out there here. As I said earlier in the show, some of the things that Ilhan Omar says I agree with, some I do not. And apparently, she had this rant, just a fury against all white people and Republican goons. And she was speaking Tuesday at an event at the Capitol organized by the founders of Black Lives Matters. And she just went on this rant saying this is not going to be the country of the xenophobes. It's not going to be the country of white people. This is not going to be the country of the few. This is going to be the country of the many. And then she went to take a swipe at members of her own Democratic caucus. Demagoguery here. Bernie Sanders, as you're probably already aware, has been pushing this idea that prisoners in prison should be allowed to vote. Now, in most states, people convicted of felonies lose their right to vote. In any case, somebody did a poll and discovered Bernie's plan to let all prisoners vote is only supported by 15% of Americans. That's 15%. So that one seems dead on arrival here. Kirsten Gillibrand has unveiled a plan yesterday that she calls Democracy Dollars. And it's basically to give every voter $600 in vouchers, not cash, but vouchers. And the vouchers can then be used to donate to federal candidates for office. And Gillibrand says that she's doing this to help reduce the influence of big money in politics. And she's certainly right on that one. Right now, the big money dominates our political system, and we're all being made to pay the price for that one. And she said, if you want to accomplish anything that the American people want us to accomplish, whether it's health care as a right, better public schools, better economy, you have to take on the greed and corruption that determine everything in Washington. Absolutely right about that. You know, we used to have laws that limited how much anybody could donate. And that was to level the playing field, so that the campaign and the elections really did represent the will of the people. But over the last couple of decades, all of these donation limits have been removed. And that Citizens United decision just opened up the sluice box of corporate tampering with the process here. Okay. Apparently, CNN's ratings dropped again, 26% last month over the same month last year. This is coming from Forbes. And the network's total primetime audience was well under 1 million viewers at 767,000. That is pretty bad. Now, MSNBC and Fox News more than double that figure at 1.66 million and 2.395 million viewers, respectively. Nobody likes a liar. They absolutely do not like that. Joe Biden is out there. He was out there speaking on The View, and he promised to bring the nation back to an era when the media pretended the president didn't have any scandals. And Biden came on out saying, nowadays, there's a new presidential scandal every day on the news. Some are real, some are invented. Well, Joe, I have to disagree with you on this one. One of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in is because of decades of the corporate media failing to report on scandals by politicians, up to and including the president. I mean, if Biden's vision had been in place, we never would have heard about Watergate. It is the job of the media to point out wrongdoing by politicians and corporate leaders. The corporate media has failed that, which is why the independent media is out here. Over in Baltimore, Mayor Catherine Pugh has now resigned a month after taking a so-called medical leave and the scandal over her sales of a self-published children's book series. They held a press conference to which she did not bother showing up, and no questions were allowed. So she is out. Talking about the economic news, Stephen Moore has now withdrawn his name from consideration for a seat on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. This is a tweet from Donald Trump, and Trump basically said he was a great pro-growth economist and truly fine person. He's decided to withdraw from the Fed process. Okay. During the first 3 months of this year, 2019, $356 million worth of cryptocurrency was stolen. Another reason to go back to that coin stuff, the gold and silver coins here. Speaking of gold, global gold demand gains in the first quarter of 2019. Central banks buy gold bullion and ETFs. And Democrats are out there trying to claim that Trump does not have much interest in preventing Russians from interfering in U.S. elections, but claim the previous administration did all it could to stop Russia from meddling in the 2016 elections. And actually, this does not line up with the headline. Anyway, global gold demand is gaining. So why is the price of gold falling? Because it is. It's down again today. They did not have a good day on the stock market either. Not horrible, but still not good. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway has announced it would expand its brokerage operations into Middle Eastern markets by opening Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Gulf properties. In other words, Buffett is going to bet big on Dubai real estate as the stock market looks to be stumbling. Now, construction spending in the United States is heading south. Apparently, there are huge drops in orders for new residential and retail properties. So that's where the slowdown is going to begin. Recessions always begin in the factories. When the factories stop hiring, that's a red warning sign. Story coming on out of governmentslaves.news. Americans can't afford to buy a home in 70% of the country. We've been recommending to our audience for years, get that credit card debt down. Credit card charge-offs have hit the highest level in nearly 7 years. Credit card delinquencies have hit the highest level in almost 8 years. Shows how silly it is that running an entire economy on debt. Speaking of debt, the Treasury Department has announced that the U.S. government may have to stop borrowing later this year because once again they're coming up on the debt ceiling. And there's going to be another big debate in Congress. Everybody's going to harump. And in the end, they'll raise it again. They really don't have a choice. And there may be a brief government shutdown. But hitting that debt ceiling could trigger a U.S. default and an immediate recession. But this hassle over the debt ceiling has like become a regular recurring story over there in the Congress. And it gets even worse than that. Starting in 2024, all U.S. debt issuance will be used to pay for interest on the debt. Just think about that. Everything the U.S. government will be able to borrow will be immediately spent on the interest the government, on the money the government bought previously. We have been talking lately about this tendency for corporations to sort of get a little bit too big for their britches and start exerting their influence in areas outside their line of business. So apparently there's these leftist activists, the group, the Sum of Us, and they have forced MasterCard to hold a vote that would see the creation of a human rights committee who would then basically ban conservatives from using the MasterCard. They basically want to stop people they do not agree with. That is a very, very dangerous development. Now, yesterday I went down to the local mailbox store to buy some stamps because I got a bunch of letters I got to get out of here this weekend. And I knew that there had been an increase in the price of stamps. It still took me a little bit by surprise. But apparently the Postmaster General is saying that the post office is in a death spiral and will run out of cash by 2024 unless major changes are made to the model which they claim the politicians set up to fail. Now, the post office has had dwindling revenue for years, even though they deliver to about 1 million new addresses each year. Well, some of the dwindling revenue is because of competing package services such as UPS and FedEx and the tendency for people to use more email. But it's also true that the post office is not the most efficient operation in the world. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And yes, once again, as you heard on the little promo there, we need your help to keep going. Things are really tight right now, and I know you're all dealing with a lot of economic hardship yourself, but the plain truth is that we will not be here unless we have your help. That's it. We could be gone in another month. So the postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And of course, those of you who want to support whatreallyhappened.com, and we need your help, it's serious, you can hit the donate button on the webpage. So we're going to go back to the phones here. Thomas in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Michael, good day to you. Yeah, Michael, what's on my mind is a few things. With just Jesse Smollett case, really has got me perplexed. You're pretty good at this, Michael. What's taking the Fed so long to get a case against the letter he sent to himself? And this Fox lady, I think she's going to be going to jail because there was a retired judge that's really looking into this now. And this was total bogus nonsense that's going on with this Smollett case. Because Smollett was actually trying to start a race war, Michael.
Well, he's saying basically he did it to up his public profile because he wanted more money from Empire. But my understanding is he's now been booted from the show completely. So that one definitely a classic hoist with one's own petard there. But you're absolutely right. The prosecutor, Fox, needs to explain what the heck was going on here, because apparently there was another case of filing a false police report that she went ahead and prosecuted. And so there's clearly a case of selective enforcement here. Yeah, it just shows how corrupt the system is.
Well, Michael, let me ask you this. If these two guys were brothers were paid $3,500 and he actually wrote the check for them, and they can prove that, why aren't they in trouble? Because they were going to perpetrate that. Accordingly, they beat up Smollett. They did hit him a few times, smacked him around and stuff. So they did a physical abuse on this guy. So if that's the case, and he was trying to blame it on another culture, what do you call this? I mean, this is absurd because this guy paid two guys to beat him up. They had the rope and the bleach, whatever they used, and they said it was a liquid when it was actually frozen. It could have even liquefied because it was so cold out that night. And then on top of it, Michael, the letter that he wrote to himself with some kind of substance. What's going on with that? Where's the feds on this? You don't hear nothing from them. Well, matter of fact, what does President Trump jump in on that? Because look what this is going to be potentially turned into.
Well, I think this whole Smollett thing, as distasteful as it is, I think it's sort of, off the bottom of Trump's to-do list in terms of national priorities. But it does. It stinks to high heaven. And it underscores the problem that only rarely do fake hate crimes actually result in the hoaxer being prosecuted. In most cases, there's a little bit of finger wagging, and that's it. It's a very tolerated thing. Now, sometimes they do get charged with filing a false police report, but in Smollett's case, yeah, his notoriety, his celebrity made it a national issue, and it did cause a lot of damage.
Well, Michael, they're talking now, since the Smollett case came out, every week they were talking about the crime rate in Chicago, how many this happened on this weekend and that weekend. Well, since the Smollett case has happened, they're not even talking what the crime rate is in Chicago on the weekends now, as far as what's the shootings and all that. But the one guy was pointing out on the, I think it was OAN, he was talking about why has that stopped? Because, every week there'd be like 30, 40, whatever shootings. But now it's like they don't even want to talk about it because it's all about the Smollett and keeping that simmered down. So I don't get it. And also, Michael, did you actually see the interview with Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols?
No, I didn't.
Okay. They have an article with this guy, and he was on the news, that he was talking about Venice Beach in California with the homelessness. He says the gang problem in Venice Beach is off the charts. And most of the guys that are homeless are in their late 20s, mid to late 20s. And the homeless situation out in Venice Beach and San Francisco is off the charts. And they're trying to keep it under wraps. But this guy was, he was the leader of the Sex Pistol band, and he's got an article, and actually he had an interview. I saw the interview for a few minutes. His name is Johnny London, whatever, and he's saying that California's off the chain with homelessness. It's the needles are everywhere, the feces. He said he's never seen anything. He said it's worse than what's going on in Europe by a mile.
Yeah, I mean, California has become one of the few places on Earth where the dogs have to be careful not to step in the human poo.
Yeah, you ought to punch that up, that article, how somebody did where you're working, and let them look at the Johnny Rotten article. It's amazing what he's talking about in Venice Beach, how it used to be beautiful, now it's a disaster, and all these coastal cities in California have gone homeless. There are tent cities everywhere.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah. Thomas, sorry to cut you off. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and in getting on back to the international news. Apparently, Guy Verhofstadt, who's the European Parliament's Brexit representative, is going to Britain next week to campaign for the Liberal Democrats in the European elections. And clearly he's out there pushing for a Brexit revolt. Thomas is still on the line. I'm sorry. Thomas, do you have something else you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, Michael, I have this to share with you. Dianne Feinstein yesterday was grilling Barr, and I thought that ironic. Here she had a Chinese national in her organization for her Senate seat for 20 years. This guy's been working for her. Why isn't she being grilled about how did she not know about a Chinese national working with her on intelligence and all that on the committee she was in? What's going on with that? You never hear nothing about that anymore.
No, just like you don't hear anything more about the Uranium One deal or the fact that the Clinton Foundation doesn't actually qualify as a 501c3. It's all about controlling the narrative, and right now those in control want their narrative to continue to be Trump-Russia collusion, and anybody who's out there saying we can't see any evidence of it, it must be a cover-up, because when that narrative collapses, which it's dangerously close to doing right now, the narrative is going to shift back on over to what did the Obama administration do? How did they justify the spying? Obviously, there wasn't any collusion, therefore the spying was for political gain.
Correct. Well, Michael, Joe Biden and Obama, Joe Biden's son, of course, maybe you can know this figure, I don't know, I wish you'd help me out with this. Joe Biden's son, I heard, made over $80 million off the Russia, some kind of Russia deal, and then you had Obama on a mic, a hot mic, saying when I win the re-election, we'll work. He was telling Mev about whatever they're going to work a deal out. I mean, you never hear about that. Trump should be running those ads all the time. 7 days a week he should be running. And how much did Joe Biden's son actually make off the Russian deal and Hillary?
Yes.
What are the actual numbers of these people making all this money off of Russia? And I remember during the election of Obama and Romney kept talking, well, Russia is a big enemy. And something about Palin or something. And then Romney was like Romney didn't know what the hell he's talking about. All of a sudden, all these Democrats talk about is Russia. And then when Romney was running for president, he's crazy. Russia would never do nothing to us. You remember that? All these networks are running how Russia was such a great ally.
Yes.
And Obama knew exactly. And then Romney was some kind of nut job. And then you got this Romney stabbing Trump in the back But here Romney was telling the American public, yeah, the Russians are behind all this craziness, and they called him a nut job. I'll never forget all that. I watched it. I seen it all play out. I'm like, what is going on here? What a conspiracy it all is. And, you know, Michael, one more thing, and I'll let you go. I know you got other callers, you got other things you want to talk about. But I really want to know how much the Catholic Church and Rome and the Pope, who's an Argentinian, who all these illegals should be heading to Argentina, well, how much money are they funding for these caravans?
$500,000.
Sure. I believe it's a lot more. I believe it's like $500 million. That's what I'm thinking. Because there's something going on with this Pope from Argentina wanting all these illegals heading north. You know, which is over a 1,000-mile trek in itself, and they're going on the train and all that. I mean, this is a conspiracy of biblical proportion.
Well, it's certainly of global proportions, and of course that's what George Soros wants. And I understand that Pope Francis is now facing a revolt within the Catholic leadership, where they basically want to sanction him for what is being described as heresies. But apparently there's this group of hardline bishops and cardinals who have basically signed a letter saying that the Pope is guilty of heresy. So we may have a new popeness soon.
I believe that, Michael. So anyway, thank you for taking my call, and try to see if I can help you guys out a little bit next week or two. Send something in, but like right now, Michael, I'm really perplexed what's going on in the world. And these Democrats, the way they're acting with this bar is insanity. I mean, what we already proved. Like you, I'll let you go back to talking. Trump wasn't aiding with the Russians. It was Obama and Biden who was aiding with the Russians, and Hillary.
Yes,
where real collusion's at. I can't wait till they actually pump all this up, and all the truth comes out of this filth. That swamp that is Washington anymore. It's disgusting.
Well, that's why the independent media has to stay up and running. And, you know, we're under attack right now. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the program here. The corporate media, their job is to keep the American mind focused on just a few things. And right now that is Trump-Russia collusion. And the corporate media is just as guilty as anybody else in the fact that these other scandals do remain hidden from the public view.
Well, you know, Michael, how can there be so much homeless in California, but they're bringing millions of illegals in there? I mean, so according to Johnny Rotten, a Sex Pistol guy, he did an interview. He lives in Venice Beach. There's all this homelessness, but they're bringing all these illegals in there by the thousands every day. I don't understand it.
And they get housing allowances.
Yeah, they get Section 8 and everything. I think they get free.
Well, the Section 8 is Trump has cut the Section 8 subsidies, but yeah. These illegal immigrants are getting better treatment than legal American citizens.
It's unbelievable. They're probably even getting free tickets and free hotel rooms at Disneyland. I'm telling you, it wouldn't surprise me. You hear something about that in the future. It's amazing what's happening.
It is.
Amazing. Anyway, thank you for taking my call, Michael.
All right, you got it here. And somebody just sent me that article about Johnny Rotten talking about the homeless crisis on Venice Beach. I remember Venice Beach from when I was a kid. I guess it's okay to say that now. And it was a very cool, beautiful place. And but virtually every place that I've lived while growing up, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, they're all being trashed. They are all being trashed here. Anyway, we're talking about how Guy Verhofstadt is going to visit Britain, campaigning for the Liberal Democrats and pushing for a Brexit revolt, because right now the poll numbers are showing that the pro-Brexit parties candidates are leading, and they want to try and stop that. They're desperate to stop Brexit any way that they can. But apparently Theresa May is going for a massive gamble to try and achieve Brexit by the flextension deadline of May 22nd. And she may be giving way on Labour's EU customs union, which a lot of people are opposed to. So we'll see what's going to happen with that one. It is a mess here. Here's an article from hrw.org. And it's saying that the world's autocrats face rising resistance. And yeah, that's certainly true. We see it all over. We're seeing it with the French Yellow Vest protests. We're seeing it, not so many protests here in the United States, or at least they're not being covered, but certainly all over Europe. Yeah, there's a pushback. And the article is basically saying that people, because of the distortions of history and movies and TV, don't recognize it when they're living in a dictatorship, because the dictatorships dress themselves up in the livery, if you will, of democracy. But the elections are all fraudulent and rigged, like they are here in this country. And people are getting fed up. They're getting very fed up. And I think I said some months ago, this push for a global government is creating a political climate conducive to a global revolution. And I think we're definitely headed in this direction. Russia Insider is reporting that over in France, the Yellow Vests are winning. And basically, the fire at Notre Dame has brought out into the open the strategic shift in public opinion that's occurred over the winter. And the shifts in public opinion are all to the advantage of the Yellow Vests. So, okay. And, but apparently the Yellow Vests are winning. Macron last week came out with an offer of a slight tax reduction, and the Yellow Vests said no, that's token only. Now, over in Poland, in Warsaw, Polish nationals are now starting to protest against that country's membership in the European Union. And they had a march yesterday, marking the 15-year anniversary of Poland joining the EU. And the Polish people are now saying they want out. It's going to be a Polexit, I guess, or a Pexit. Not sure how we'll phrase that one here. Over in Brussels, and ahead of the coming EU elections, in which a lot of Eurosceptic candidates may win, Jean-Claude Juncker has openly bragged that he will make sure that any Eurosceptic candidates will not receive any top jobs in Brussels, regardless of the results of the election. And he came on out rejecting the idea that the surge at the ballot box for national populist parties is going to in any way slow the progress of the globalist EU integration process. So he's basically out there saying the EU was a stepping stone to the global government, the New World Order. And if you look at how the EU is treating the people of EU, you have to understand a global government would be that much worse. The larger a government becomes, the more abusive it becomes. Getting on back to the Smollett case here, over in Chicago, apparently one of the newspapers, the Chicago Sun-Times, used Antifa-linked sources to try and defend Kim Foxx and bash her critics as white nationalists. They're trying to basically turn her and Jussie Smollett into the victims here. So again, the corporate media is out there. They're pushing that white nationalist narrative here. Okay, Julian Assange, as you know, is in a British jail. He's been sentenced to 50 weeks in jail for skipping his bail. And it turns out the extradition hearing is happening sooner. Apparently, it's going to be taking place on May 30th, end of this month. And basically, there was a hearing. He testified over a video link. And when he was asked if he desired to be extradited to the United States, he said, no, he doesn't. I do not wish to surrender myself for extradition for doing journalism that has won many, many awards and protected many people. So that's going to be an ugly. Of course, he gets back here. They're going to put him away for life. They're going to make an example out of him because they don't want independent media reporting. They absolutely do not. Okay, we're going to go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I want to correct Tom. Tom, that was Biden and Ukraine, not Russia. Ukraine and
yes.
Was it Burisma and his son Hunter Biden involved in that? We got to be careful when we go Ukraine or Russia, because there's nothing wrong with the people. We're talking about business deals with oligarchs in those countries, not Russian government officials or Ukraine government. Even though there is involvement with them, but it's not the. It's like the American people. We're not responsible for elements of our government that that's causing all this mess.
Yes.
But Mike, I wanted to. Tom is right on. Like I watched, not Tom, Joe from Tennessee earlier. He said the whole circus show with the Democrats, and it was embarrassing. It's like, but I mean, Joe, it's not a fun thing to watch because like it's embarrassing our country. Like it's a joke. I mean, and it riles up people. It makes people even angrier at Trump or the Republicans, and then the Republicans angry at the Democrat. So it's actually fracturing this country even more. So this is not.
Yes, it is
a good thing. And the whole thing is like, Joe, you're wrong. I'm telling you, there's not going to be indictments with these people. This is the oligarchy of your country. This is the system of this country for the past decades. These people will do a false flag before. I mean, you're talking about Obama, Hillary Clinton, Loretta Lynch, Comey, the whole gang, John Brennan, Clapper. These people ain't going to be indicted, man. I mean, I just don't see that happening. I really don't. I mean, I'd like to see it.
Me too.
I'd like things to change because we're a train wreck. But I just don't see this is the powerful. This is the deep state. They're not going to go down lightly.
No.
I just don't see indictments happening. And I know people keep saying, oh, QAnon. Remember that? What happened to that? In the summer they're coming and it goes, nothing happens. It's just I don't.
Well, I never had much confidence in QAnon to begin with. I thought it was a psyop right from the beginning.
I know Joe is holding out hope and stuff, and other people are, but I just don't see those indictments coming. And like I said, when the end of the summer comes and nothing's here and done, it still goes back to the end. No wall being built. No infrastructure plan because everybody's bickering in Washington. What else? No fixing of the electoral voting thing, like you said. What else? Nothing's being done. It's like a stalemate in Washington, D.C.
It's like a nightmare that you can't wake up from.
And like Tom says, with the Sex Pistols guy with Venice Beach, with the young 20-year-olds all sleeping in tents. That's happening on the East Coast and the West Coast,
yes,
and in the middle of the country. So that's just another sign of an empire in decline. And it's just going to keep getting worse because prices of housing on the East and West Coast is out of control. Like people are like in Silicon Valley, they're sleeping out of campers. How is that possible? So I just don't see things changing, like really, like for the foreseeable future,
Yeah, it's a pretty depressing prospect. Anyway, Dustin, I'm going to put you on hold. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. We're talking about keeping Ukraine and Russia separate, not confusing them when we talk about the corrupt deal with Biden's son. So, Dustin, what else have you got?
You mentioned it before, the Baltimore mayor, which resigned. Did they ever find her? Because I know she went missing for like a couple weeks or a month or two.
Well, I know she didn't show up for the press conference today, so I don't know if it's a case of they don't know where she is or she just is staying out of the public eye.
Yeah, a lot of people, I don't know if you know this, but like, well, you said it, she was running a pay-to-play where I don't even know if she wrote the children's book or had a ghostwriter write the children's book. And then the Kaiser the pharmaceutical company would buy 10,000 copies
Yep.
of the book for her. It was a pay-to-play scheme, kind of like what Hillary Clinton was doing. And they all, Mike, they all do this.
Yeah.
Like the mayor got caught, but she's not the only one. It's all going on. So there's it's all corrupt. Like I said, everything's corrupt. Like how do you fix this kind of stuff? You can't.
You can't. We're just going to have to let it crash. And again, my long-term prognostication is that we're going to see a Soviet Union-style collapse of this country. And obviously, getting from where we were to that collapse, we're going to be going through periods just like we're seeing here right now with all this open warfare between the political parties and the corruption being exposed. Again, I think, it's very frustrating because I spent literally a third of my life trying to sort of head this off. And obviously I was unable to educate sufficient numbers of Americans to have an impact. So it is very frustrating because I think things are going to get a lot worse before they get better.
And the problem, Mike, also is like everybody knew what she was, what she was doing.
Yes.
And like, and the other side, the ones who were buying the books, they knew what they were doing, and they just don't care. They look the other way. That's why I said it's a systemic problem, just like with Smollett, like Thompson, like. It was all, he got off because it's who he was.
Yes.
And like nothing's going to happen to that Fox woman. Nothing's going to have, Rahm Emanuel most likely knew what was going on, but he says he don't, but I don't believe that. And probably the chief of police didn't know because, like, why would they tell him? But, yeah, I just don't see things being fixed, because it's ingrained in these people. It's just,
they love the system the way it is because it serves them very well. So no, this country will never be fixed from the top down. It's going to have to collapse or worse. There's going to have to be a bottom-up revolution.
Well, they do know what they say. The fish rots from the head down, so that's what it is,
Well, definitely.
At this point, All right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are open. And we're coming up here on our top of the hour break. Apparently down in Florida, the lawmakers have now approved arming teachers with guns in classrooms after undergoing police-style training and a psychiatric evaluation. I'm in favor of both of those. And, of course, the gun grabbers are saying, no, guns on the campus are bad. They're going to be deadly accidents. So we'll see what's going to happen. I'll tell you this, though. Just the knowledge that some of those teachers are armed, there won't be shootings in those schools. And so there should be some music playing right now. There it is. All right. So we're going to take a break for station identification, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a phone call from Jim in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Jim in New York, you're on the air. I'm not hearing Jim. Jim going once, going twice. Okay. Now, remember the case of Sacha Baron Cohen, who did a lot of movies, some of them kind of a little out there, but he's got into trouble with his TV series, Who is America? And he played a lot of dirty tricks on a lot of people, including the Honorable Thomas J. Hogan. And there's a lawsuit now against Cohen, Showtime, and the parent company CBS because they defamed Judge Roy Moore. I'm sorry, it was Judge Roy Moore. And what happened on the show, Who's America? Cohen appeared in disguise as a former Mossad agent and claimed that he had a device that could detect pedophiles. And he waved it over Roy Moore and, of course, set it off, so it beeped. And that basically branded Judge Moore as a pedophile on national television. And it cost him the election. So that did cross a line, I think. Okay, do we have Jim in New York? Jim, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Ah, okay. All right. So what's on your mind today?
No, I had some thoughts. I usually just call once a week to get some thoughts. And we all on the alt-right, if you will, assume that Hillary was supposed to win and that, it's a shock that Trump won. Did you ever think that the elite, if you will, or the oligarchs actually wanted Trump to win for some reason?
Well, Trump had a lot of support on, going into his campaign, obviously. And I think we need to avoid this idea of thinking that there is some kind of a unified block of control in this country, because there isn't. In fact, if anything, it is badly factionalized. And we're seeing, the current ins, meaning the liberal Democrats, are trying to consolidate their power and control, but it's beginning to slip. Those numbers from CNN's viewership, I think, are one symptom of that. So Hillary had her supporters and Trump had his supporters. And there were oligarchs on both sides.
Yes. I don't know. I have a suspicion. Trump, he kind of is like a fake populist, fake champion of middle America.
Well, every politician plays that way. I mean, look at the speeches we're getting already from the Democratic candidates going into the primary season, and they're all saying the same thing. Middle America is the backbone of this country, and we've got every politician says exactly the same thing going into the elections. The trouble is that in 2016, because Trump had come from the outside of the system, people were more inclined to believe him when he said that he was going to end the wars, make vaccines safe, make our elections honest. Again, in hindsight, yeah, Trump was lying to get the votes just as much as anybody else.
Yes. And part of my suspicion is that if God forbid there's a war with Iran, they could never sell a war with Hillary. Middle America couldn't stand Hillary. Middle America, pickup truck driving America, they hated Hillary. But they may go to war under Trump.
I disagree.
That's a suspicion. No?
I disagree. I think that the American people are war weary. They're sick and tired of war. They're sick and tired of what it has cost them, both in money and the lives and limbs of their children. I think that's why the United States used Saudi Arabia as a proxy to go into Yemen. I think that's why Trump and the Pentagon are already hesitant about going into Venezuela. We've got these wars all over the planet, and the American people are looking at them and saying, why? Why are we doing this? What business is it of ours to go into these other countries and mess around with them? And ever since the truth came out about Saddam's nuclear weapons, the American people know that all of these wars are based on lies, frauds, and deceptions. I don't think the American people are going to support a war in Iran. I don't think the American people are going to support a war in Venezuela.
No, I don't. but they certainly wouldn't under Hillary. For some reason, Hillary, it's like a personality contest. I mean, Trump, he's funny. He's funny. He has a far better personality than Hillary.
Yes, that's true.
So, he's very charismatic. But in the end, I don't see him in control of anything, particularly in the realm of foreign policy.
Well, it's known that Bolton is basically running foreign policy. And as I said earlier in the show, you've got Trump and the Pentagon saying maybe it's not a good idea to directly militarily intervene in Venezuela. Bolton is saying do it, do it, do it, do it. And that's going to be the litmus test, because if it does wind up that we do go into Venezuela militarily, that's going to tell us Trump is not in control.
I don't think we'll go in Venezuela. I would be more worried about Syria and Iran. Because, remember, with the Wesley Clark, the 7 countries
Yes.
in 5 years, Venezuela or North Korea weren't on that list.
Well, I'm sure they've been added to that list since then, certainly Venezuela. When you understand that most of the countries on Wesley Clark's list were the oil-producing nations of the Middle East.
Yes, and Venezuela is certainly an oil-producing
Yes.
country. But you're right, maybe they altered the list.
Yeah, I think Venezuela was added to that list, and again, it really is. I mean, Venezuela has the largest known reserves of oil on Earth, and it has rankled the U.S. Economic system, if you will, that Venezuela persists in selling their oil for whatever currency the buying nation wishes to use. That's been a big problem all along. They sell oil to China for the yuan, for example. And the United States right now is desperate to keep the dollar the global currency. That policy is failing. Countries are turning away from it. But that's a big part of what these wars are all about. Getting control of these oil-producing nations and then telling the rest of the world, if you want to buy this oil, you will buy it for U.S. dollars.
I don't think they could sell a war in Venezuela. It's so obvious. It's too obvious. I don't know how they can sell that. I can't see an outright invasion. We'll try to do what we did in Syria, try to destabilize them. But an invasion, I don't think so. I can't see people even people who, aren't that well informed. Once they hear that Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia, I don't think they can sell it.
Well, I don't think they're even really trying to sell it any longer. I mean, obviously, corporate media is out there pushing the propaganda against Venezuela and, for that matter, Russia and China. But again, as those CNN numbers are showing, the American people have stopped listening. And I think the attitude of the government is, yeah, we're going to go on out. We're going to have all these wars. You're going to pay for them. Your kids are going to die in them. What are you going to do to stop us?
I don't know. I don't know what anyone, you could have 1 million people in Washington, D.C., and the mainstream media would just totally ignore it. They'll just blacklist it. They won't show it.
Yep.
They've had anti-abortion protesters, 500,000 in the Capitol, and they don't even show it on TV. And meanwhile, they'll show like a couple hundred Black Lives Matter people, and they'll show that 24/7.
Yes.
So, well, thanks for the call, Mike, and you have a good show.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And back to the phones, Terry in California. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a hearing on that San Diego synagogue shooter the other day, and he pleaded pleaded not guilty. He was acting real funny after that whole thing happened, calling 911. And that some of the shootings, the shooters acts real funny. Like in Aurora, the Batman shooter, he kind of warned the guys that were going to his apartment, saying, "Hey, it's bugged in there. Be careful." So it's just something not right. I'm going to be very interested in hearing his testimony on why he thinks he's not guilty, and if there's something that says he heard voices like the guy did up at the Navy Yard.
Yep.
Then I understand there's some kind of device they can shoot at the skull and some radiation that puts voices in somebody's mind. Have you heard about that?
Yes, I have. It was developed some years ago, and basically it's a modulated microwave transmitter, and it basically causes the bones of the skull to vibrate, which of course conducts to the ear.
Right. It'd be interesting to see if he makes some statements that makes that incriminating. And of course, you can't get the drugs they're on because it's against the Privacy Act and against your medical privacy and doctor-patient relationship and all that kind of stuff. So that's always covered up.
Yes.
And of course, this guy was using an AR-15. Of course.
Yes.
That's another thing. So the whole thing kind of smells like a false flag, and I think it came right before they're going to have a vote in the House on that BDS bill.
Yes.
And it could be the timing of that thing was made to foster some sympathy for Israel. I don't know.
Could very well be.
It'd be interesting. And the other thing is he may not go to trial. If they don't want something to come out, they'll just do a plea with him, and put the pressure on him to take the plea, and that way, nothing gets out about his case or his, what he wants to say in his defense, But anyway, it's just something to think about. I just thought I'd mention that.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call, Terry. We're going to let you go. A lot of false flags in the world today. Okay, getting on back to the news here. Over in North Carolina, the Senate was able to override the governor's veto of the bill that was going to protect newborns from infanticide. In other words, they passed this bill that said that if during a late-term abortion the baby is born alive, that it has to be given the same medical care as any other kid. And the governor vetoed it, and the Senate has overridden the veto. So a little bit of a victory there. Over in Alabama, Democratic State Representative John Rogers made what I think is a very offensive comment. He was out there basically debating this bill would put a stop to most abortions. And the representative said, hey, some kids are unwanted, so you kill them now or you kill them later. You bring them into the world unwanted, unloved, you send them to the electric chair. Just incredibly, incredibly callous. Planned Parenthood supporting students at the University of Texas, San Antonio, basically mocked a pro-life group's display known as the Cemetery of the Innocents, which is an art installation. It's dedicated to all of the unborn who are killed by abortion. And the Students for Life chapter that created the display caught the vulgar mockery from members of the school students on video. And apparently they were chanting, "Stop, hey, hey, what's that sound? All the fetuses are in the ground," dancing in the mock cemetery, and pointing to one of the gravestones and saying, "Look, there's mine right there." And another female student joked that they should kiss in the fetus graveyard and said getting an abortion is her biggest kink. And Some of the members came to talk to us, but would not have dialogue. They just wanted to shout their pro-abortion points at us. One girl said I was using my white privilege and wasn't allowed to be out there talking about the issue when it affects black women. You know, when the dialogue stops, when actual meaningful dialogue stops, the next step after that is violence. And I fear we're headed there. Over at Facebook, they're doubling down on their censorship. They're blacklisting sites of populists and Islam critics in Britain. Apparently, they blacklisted Louis Farrakhan, Alex Jones, Paul Nalin, Milo Yiannopoulos, Paul Joseph Watson, Laura Loomer, and InfoWars are now purged from Facebook and Instagram, saying the accounts violated its policies against dangerous individuals and organizations. Well, I have a lot of opinions about InfoWars. I don't see them as being dangerous. So they will be prohibited from creating new accounts, although Facebook and Instagram users will continue to be able to create posts praising them and their viewpoints. So apparently they took down the the page of politicalite, Yellow Vest activist James Goddard. It's amazing. There was a single 10-second ad that was put up by America's PAC. And it's a pro-life group. Single 10-second ad got them censored by Google. And the ad was about the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Amazing here. Okay. Over at the Poynter Institute. Now, the Poynter Institute, on its About page, says it champions freedom of expression. And yet they just published a list of 515 media sites, including Breitbart News and WhatReallyHappened.com, that it wants blacklisted and shut down. Now, Poynter calls this a list, an index of unreliable news sites, and is basically going to advertisers to tell them, don't sponsor these sites. Put the sites out of business. Now, my site was listed as having rumor on it, which is kind of a little hard to understand because I hard link to every one of my sources. But this is it. It's open warfare. They want to shut us down. And that's why early in the show I was saying, unless we get some major donations soon, WhatReallyHappened.com is going to be gone. Anyway, another follow-up story, this from Domagood, basically points out that Poynter itself has come on out with corrections to the list. So the list is erroneous. It's not reliable. Okay, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, down in Australia, there is this Israeli cyber gang. They're based in Australia. They call themselves NSW Great, which I presume stands for New South Wales. And they've been hit with more charges. Apparently, over the last 5 years, they have been selling drugs through the dark web to the tune of $17 million. And they finally tracked down NSW Great. Turns out it was more than one person. It was one man with a two-woman team. And they were taken down by the Strike Force Roydom, which is a special police unit dedicated to the fight against drug trafficking in New South Wales. This one is a little upsetting. Up in Northern California, there's a high school. It is called George Washington High School. And there is a push now to remove the murals of George Washington because they traumatize the students. Now, these murals are 83 years old. They've been there for a very, very long time, but critics are out there. Well, snowflakes, let's say what it is. The snowflakes are saying They're offensive to Native Americans and African Americans. So apparently, a San Francisco Unified School District working group says the murals should be removed and put in storage to protect the students. They're erasing our history, people. They're erasing our culture. That's what's going on here. You know, I look at what's going on here. I know a lot of people make parallels to George Orwell's 1984. I keep thinking back to George Lucas' THX 1138, where the world is bland, everybody's dressed the same, they just go on about their assigned duties. When you open the medicine chest in the bathroom, there's the voice that says, "This is the pill you should take." It's amazing. Okay. Out in California, one of the good things that they have done is a right to repair bill. Now, this is becoming a hot button issue all across the country because if you're my age, you remember a time when you could get your car, you could open it up and fix it yourself, or appliances, you could take them apart, solder the wire, put it back together. And of course, it meant that you saved a lot of money because you weren't being forced to buy a new one. Well, in the spirit of planned obsolescence, companies these days try and manufacture products which the end user can't repair. Instead, either they buy a new one or they go off to a factory authorized repair person. In either event, it's more money. And Apple is campaigning against the right to repair bill, saying owners should not be allowed to fix their own iPhones because they could hurt themselves if they damage the lithium-ion battery. Anyway, speaking of Apple, their iPhone sales plunge at a record pace. There is lackluster demand for the flagship handset, so profits slid 16% this last quarter. Yeah, $1,000 for a handset? That's ridiculous. Especially when you have like these Samsung units now coming on out that are very capable and they're very inexpensive. We mentioned this yesterday, but it's worth talking about again. Unconstitutional searches of electronic devices at American airports have quadrupled since 2015. And the official reason given is, you know, we're looking for terrorists, we're looking for criminals and drug dealers. The problem is that the data is simply copied off your phone and sent off to other people's databases someplace else. The searches are being done for reasons beyond customs and immigration enforcement. Now, there's a federal lawsuit that claims scouring the electronic devices without a warrant is unconstitutional. But as you know, the government not too long ago declared that the country within 100 miles of an international border is now a constitution-free zone. Somebody should have taken that one right up to the Supreme Court. But do you know something? 66% of Americans, 2/3 of the entire U.S. population, live within that 100-mile deep constitution-free zone. Here in Hawaii, everybody does. The state just isn't that big. So what they've done is declared that the U.S. border, which once used to be a line, is now that 100-mile band inside the United States. It's now all considered border. And therefore, they can do what they want. At least that's the claim. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Here we're talking about computers and electronic devices. And one of Amazon's latest ventures is the Ring doorbell, which is a doorbell that has a built-in camera which you can access over the internet to your smart device to see who is ringing your doorbell when you're not at home. And apparently Amazon now wants to create a user-driven crime news network run by their customers. And they're currently looking to hire someone with the title Managing Editor News for the Ring doorbell surveillance hardware. And that's just a little bit scary. And it's another reminder, you can start out with a product which appears to be very useful, and somebody can turn it to a negative purpose. But I think that's a very, very scary situation. Meanwhile, there's been another incident where a secret backdoor has been found in networking gear, perfect for government espionage. No, it's not the Chinese, it's Cisco again. Man, oh man. Now, Bill DeMercapi, a 17-year-old independent security researcher, has discovered a critical remote code execution vulnerability in the Dell Support Assist utility that comes pre-installed on most Dell computers. And apparently hackers can use that to compromise the system remotely. It's like these companies don't even really care. And they just put all this stuff on there for their own convenience and the advertisers' convenience. And there's just doesn't seem to be a real commitment to security. Maybe because computer security is itself big business. Because when you have all the stuff, then you have to buy the antivirus this and the anti-spam that and the anti-malware this and all the rest of it. It's just, again, more money. And I miss the days of simple computers like my little Commodore VIC-20 up there, where you know, you turn it off, turn it on, it's reset to the factory settings. You don't have to worry about something being in there. And to be honest, there was malware back then as well. And I remember when I was briefly working as an Amiga developer, there was a nasty incident with a software company that unfortunately made the master disk for a game they were publishing on a computer that had malware in it. And it went out on that master disk, and it basically destroyed the company. They went out of business. Over in India, at University, Telangana State, basically the students had final exams, and they were using computers to score the final exams. And the computer made a mistake and basically told a huge number of students they had failed. Not just from A to B, failed completely. And 21 students committed suicide over this IT glitch. One boy threw himself in front of a train. Another girl burned herself to death. So the ministers are admitting, well, there were major failings with the new IT system used to grade the papers. And there may have been a human error as well. Just insane. Not too long ago, there was a video that came on out. Actually, it was about last month. And it involved the SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule during a static test of its Attitude rockets. And when they fired the abort rockets, the video appeared to show the capsule was destroyed. And NASA called it an anomaly. SpaceX called it an anomaly. But now NASA is finally admitting, yes, the Crew Dragon capsule was totally destroyed by the firing up of the abort thrusters. So they're still trying to keep a lid on it. And apparently, over at SpaceX, employees are being warned they could be fired for leaking any footage from inside the Kennedy Space Center. This went out as an internal email sent to the employees. And again, it does confirm it wasn't an anomaly, it was an explosion. The capsule rekitted itself. Now, over at Blue Origin, they've had a little bit of better luck. The New Shepard spacecraft launched its 11th test mission. This was an uncrewed jaunt. It carried 38 science experiments to suborbital space and back, and basically made the perfect vertical touchdown. So good luck for them. There is no royal road to space, unfortunately. Space is still dangerous. One of the places where the new NASA went wrong was when they came on in, they wanted to put NASA on a business-like footing and run the space shuttle like it was an airline. And that was ambitious. It certainly sounded good in the press conferences. It wasn't realistic, as we found out with Challenger and Columbia. Getting onto the area of vaccines, apparently there's been another incident. Zara Beatty, 13, previously a sporty young girl who loved football, netball, and cycling. She is now confined to bed or a wheelchair when she does leave home. And she suffered an adverse reaction to the Gardasil HPV vaccine back in 2015. Now, the CDC's own statistics show that 79 million Americans are currently infected with HPV, yet only about 100 of those will actually be symptomatic. And only about 11,000 women are diagnosed with cervical cancer in any given year. So basically, CDC is recommending that everybody be vaccinated against a disease that only affects around 0.014% of all those infected with the virus. It's all about the money. It's all about pushing product. Story coming out of Natural News, and we talked about this before. The measles vaccines are killing more children than the measles. It's not even close. According to data from the CDC itself, not a single person has died while being infected with measles in more than 15 years. Actually, that's not accurate. There was a woman in Oregon who died of the measles, I think it was last year, right after getting the measles vaccine. The CDC data is also showing that at least 100 people have died as a direct consequence of receiving the MMR triple vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella, which is supposed to protect against the measles. So the vaccine is actually far more dangerous than measles itself. Back in the 1950s and 60s, measles was just part of growing up. There was an episode of the Brady Bunch where they all had measles, and it was just being joked about as a harmless rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. It just wasn't that big a deal. And here's another question. California has a vaccine mandate, but it hasn't stopped the measles. So there was this bill, Senate Bill 277, was supposed to eliminate all measles outbreaks, like the one that occurred in Disneyland in 2014, which Pan blamed on children who hadn't been vaccinated with Merck and Company's MMR vaccine for measles, mumps, and rubella. But the claim that unvaccinated children were causing the measles, if it's true, then why is California right now experiencing what the corporate media is describing as a serious measles outbreak more than 4 years after the vaccine mandate became law? And we have this situation where Cal State Los Angeles and UCLA are both imposing quarantines on their students. They're acting like this is a real, like Ebola. Apparently, there is a cruise ship that's owned by the Church of Scientology that's being held at sea because one member of the crew has come down with the measles. But of course, this is good for the pharmaceutical companies. Merck's first quarter net quadruples from both vaccine sales and their latest cancer drug, Keytruda. just blew past Wall Street expectations. Sales of Keytruda jumped 55% to $2.27 billion, about 1/4 of Merck's total revenue. And during the quarter, the injected drug racked up U.S. approvals as an initial treatment for advanced kidney cancer and advanced non-small cell lung cancer, and for treating melanomas that occur after surgery. So Keytruda is now approved for nearly 20 cancer types and patient groups here. Okay, this was badly written. Merck recently got approval for treating lung cancer patients in China, a huge market where Merck is already ahead of the competitors. It's all about the money. It's all about the big business. Take your normal childhood disease. Now, granted, there was a time in history when measles was serious. In fact, during the early colonization of Hawaii, there was a major problem where measles that had been brought to the islands by the Calvinist missionaries infected the indigenous population, which had no natural immunity, and wiped out a significant part of the population. But all disease-causing pathogens evolved to be less lethal, because it doesn't do a pathogen any good to kill its host and limit its ability to reproduce. And that's why over time, illnesses like measles have become more of a childhood annoyance. But it's now being promoted again as the new horror disease. How terrible. To help sell vaccines. Over at Bayer AG, they are upping the advertising budget for Roundup, and apparently this is to counter the growing awareness of the thousands of lawsuits pending against Monsanto, alleging that glyphosate causes cancer. And the World Health Organization said it is a probable human carcinogen. Probably would have said it was definite. But Monsanto lobbyists can be, shall we say, very persuasive. And again, we live in a country where dangerous products can be sold as long as there's enough money to be made in it. So, okay. Apparently Michigan's Upper Peninsula is still getting snow. They got about 4 inches of snow yesterday. And apparently it broke the 1.2-inch daily snowfall record set back in 2005. And they're predicting probably 7 inches by the end of the day today, followed by the usual warnings about traffic. So the global warming cult has come up with a new term of craft. It used to be global warming, and when it became obvious the world isn't warming, they changed it to climate change. That climate change was just automatically bad, even though climate changes all the time. Then they decided to up the hysteria factor by going to climate disruption. You humans are disrupting the climate. You've got to pay a carbon tax. You've got to buy carbon credits. Well, now they're upping it again. The new phrase is the climate crisis. We're in a crisis right now. And even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got in on it with her claim that we only have 12 years to save the earth from all you icky-poo human beings. And we've been hearing that kind of hysterics for decades. Long before Al Gore, there were always newspaper articles about the world is warming, we've got to do something. Then in the 1970s, they were talking about a new ice age. That didn't happen. Then they were back to global warming in the 1990s and early 2000s. That clearly is not happening. It's a scam. It's a huge scam. And anybody who says there's no such thing as wide-ranging conspiracies against the general public, this is one right there. Got it staked out on the ground for you to study and learn from. You had politicians like Al Gore. You had the corporate media. You had all these so-called science channels. You had NASA, NOAA, Hadley Climate Research Unit, Penn State. We're all caught up in this goal of telling a scary story about how the planet was going to melt and it was all your fault. And somebody poured a lot of money into this to kickstart it and get it going. And if you look back over all of this hysteria, none of the doomsday predictions that were made have come about. The polar bears are still alive. In fact, they're so populous they become a pest animal. The coasts have not been flooded. Snowfall, we still get snowfalls. Still getting snowfalls. This is May, and there's still snow in the Midwest. And of course, that's going to impact the growing season. Winters have been getting longer and harder, and our growing seasons are getting shorter. And when you add on top of that the massive flooding that's taking place both in Canada and the American Midwest, there are going to be food shortages, which once again underscores the ridiculousness of flooding this country with illegal immigrants. Right now, there are 26 million hungry mouths that will be competing for food with the American people at the supermarket. Then you've got that swine flu over in China that's decimating their pork producers. The Gulf of Mexico is toxified, can't eat that seafood. Out here in the Pacific, we're having to be very careful about what we take out of the ocean. Starting to think that Albert Malthus was right. We're heading toward a catastrophe. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. Fox News is reporting that Maduro is still in charge of Venezuela despite the U.S. efforts. So we'll see where that's going to go. A little bit of good news. Over in Colorado, they were trying to pass a bill that would make it more difficult for parents to exempt their children from vaccines. And apparently it got voted down. And of course, the politicians who are behind this are saying they're going to come back with a stronger bill. We're going to come on back with a much stronger bill. You will have your vaccines. You will have that needle in your child's arm, and you will pay for it. Over at Fox Entertainment, they've just announced that Empire is officially picked up for a 6th season. And basically, they're saying by mutual agreement, the studio has negotiated an extension to Jussie Smollett's option for season 6. But at this time, there are no plans for the character of Jamal to return to Empire. So it looks like he's definitely off of that. And it's a very clever thing, because while he's under option, his ability to go and do other projects is severely limited. So Fox is definitely showing their displeasure over that stupid fake hate crime. And that's exactly what it was. It's just very dumb. Interesting little article. This is out of Investment Watch blog. I was talking just a little while ago about we have food shortages coming up. And we have bankruptcies slamming the American dairy and grain farmers. Banks are less willing to lend because of the risk. So less land is being planted because of a lack of financing. What they're getting ready to do is they're going to blame the food shortages on the farmers and the fishermen, not on chronic mismanagement of both the economy and the climate. They didn't want to manage the climate. They wanted to sell it. They basically wanted to sell it. Meanwhile, over in India, they're getting ready for some tough times there along their east coast, because there's this monster cyclone called Fani that is about to make landfall probably tomorrow, and it's just going to slam into, it's already a Cat 5. So they're going to have a tough time over there. Little story coming out of governmentslaves.news, and this takes a different view from like Dustin in New Jersey. It says it'll soon be time for President Trump to unleash military arrests of all the domestic enemies in America, tech CEOs, journo terrorists, treasonous lawmakers, and more. I'd like to see it happen. I don't think it will. The system is always, always going to protect itself. And apparently Senator Rick Scott is now out there saying that all of our problems in this hemisphere are caused by Cuba. Okay, there's the music time for me to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everybody that you know. Use email, paper mail. Forget about social media. It is totally, totally filtered right now and utterly worthless to the American people, unless you're into funny cat videos. So please donate to Republic Broadcasting. They need it. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We really need it right now. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.